Well, quite a lot been going on over the weekend. Following Vanessa Bailey's talk presentation at the Geneva Press Club, all kinds of stuff going on. Well, Vanessa quickly followed up that presentation with an article on 21st Century Wire. The headline is "White Helmets in Local Councils. Is the UK Foreign Office Financing Terrorism in Syria with Taxpayer Funds?" So Vanessa, welcome to the programme. Just briefly, give us an overview of what you're saying in this article.
An overview, crikey. Right. Well, basically, I mean, this is the same. It's an expansion on the evidence presented at the Geneva Press Club, which shows that the UK Foreign Office, through DFID and through the Conflict Stability and Security Fund, has effectively been funding terrorist-led organisations inside Syria, and those include the Free Syrian Police, but most importantly the White Helmets and the so-called, euphemistically called local councils, which have been set up in what are only and exclusively the terrorist-held areas inside Syria, which of course are described by many who support this financing as Free Syria. How they can describe an area that is under control of Al-Qaeda and its associates as being Free Syria is beyond me. But to really sort of try and put it into a nutshell, that's what this article is about. But what it does is expose hugely the leadership of these organisations as being affiliated to not only Nusra Front, but some of the more even hardline organisations like Abu Amara that acted as security and protection agents for Nusra Front, particularly in East Aleppo.
And one of the key organisations, one of the key projects, was this Project Tamkeen, which says it's supporting Syria's local councils. And one of the points that you've made quite strongly over the last year or two is that Syria's local councils are directly affiliated with Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, they're directly affiliated with Al-Qaeda. They're acting as a shadow state construct within Syria. In other words, diverting local councils away from the Syrian government and from, disrupting and destabilizing the Syrian state as a result. Actually, what's interesting is that I received the responses that had been given to Baroness Cox. I only received them yesterday. And in fact, the British government is now saying, via Lord Bates, they're now saying that actually they ended partnership with Tamkeen. They ended it, not Adam Smith or Integrity Consulting, which are the intermediaries that were working with Tamkeen, and that they're now working with a program called Tatweer, which is one that has been used, I believe, in Libya and in Iraq, which basically means development. So according to the official response from Lord Bates to Caroline Cox's questions regarding the funding of Al-Qaeda and other proscribed organizations, terrorist organizations in Syria, their response has been to simply try and put up smoke and mirrors again and to say, look, we're not working with Tamkeen anymore. We're working with this Tatweer, which I can find no information on anywhere, by the way, so far. If anyone can find it, that would be amazing.
So this seems to be some kind of rebranding, a bit like the terrorist organisations do themselves. But anyway, nonetheless,
and actually,
nonetheless, Tamkeen was funded by not only the European Union, but the Department for International Development for quite a long time. But strangely enough, you had almost no further stepped off the podium in Geneva when this happened to Project Tamkeen's website. Just a coincidence, Vanessa?
There are no coincidences, Mike. I mean, I was only looking at that website, I think, about 24 hours before I went into Geneva just to clarify some information. And then when I tried to look at it the other day, this is what we got.
Absolutely.
Which is interesting.
Okay, so let's just remind, or at least look at who actually is responsible for Project Tamkeen. So we have a look at who owns the domain, for example, and we find that it is registered by Adam Smith International Limited. So they own the domain. It's their project. But, well, this morning the BBC has pushed this out. UK foreign aid money diverted to extremists in Syria. This is highlighting a panorama programme which is going to be shown this evening. But the BBC weren't even the first to announce their own panorama programme, because it seems that The Guardian did that yesterday, with BBC and row over false claims for cash for Syrian police being paid to jihadists. So we'll talk about this in a second, but before we do, I just wanted to highlight the comments section on this article because it is fantastic. I just wanted to show a few of the comments, and you get the gist of where the comments were going with this. So here's one from Davros saying the BBC is facing a backlash, ? Unfortunately, nowadays that happens whenever they do anything, like existing, for example. We've got a comment here from Sporadic Wit, who says, I must admit I never knew the Adam Smith Institute had a paramilitary wing. Is there a connection? We have a comment from Rookie's Cot, who says the BBC is simply the propaganda wing of Her Majesty's government. We've got one from Big Blue Sky. This comment was removed by a moderator because it didn't meet the community guidelines. There were quite a few of those, strangely enough. We have a comment here from Andy McCarthy, who says, he quotes that from the article, which it says the BBC said it is confident that its journalists on the investigation will be broadcast in full. And he's commenting, after Saddam, Iraq, weapons of mass destruction, so on, the BBC has lost my trust. Gulp Gulp says, I really don't know what all the fuss is about. We already fund and armed the biggest jihadi group, the Saudis. So you get the feeling of you get the impression of where this is going. Somebody else making the point that we've been funding Nusra and ISIS, that it's insane and so on. But the final comment is left to The Guardian themselves, who clearly at some point decided that the thread wasn't going the way they were hoping. And the community moderator for The Guardian said, comments on this thread were opened in error and will soon close. So we don't want any more comment. Patrick?
I think I'm going to launch a new hashtag today, Mike, and everybody in the UK Column chat room, get out on Twitter and hashtag this. Instead of CIF, comment is free, let's hashtag CINF, comment is not free, because this seems to be The Guardian's new value set for free speech on their wonderful platform, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. The Telegraph then saying that the government has now suspended support for foreign aid project in Syria over claims cash was being diverted to extremists. But from what you've just said, Vanessa, it seems like that decision, or the implication is that decision has already been made.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's interesting, the last time that we saw or that we monitored a reaction like this from The Guardian in its comment section was, of course, during their promoting of the white helmets for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2016, when we saw a very similar censorship of comments and a removal of comments. So an interesting connection to make there. But I think another point that needs to be made was I was contacted by a journalist in the EU this morning regarding the funding that Denmark has been giving to the Free Syrian Police. Now, that funding has been removed from the Danish government website also. I was told it was on the website only a few days ago. It's now gone. So what we're seeing here are, I believe, a sort of a controlled explosion. The focus is on the Free Syrian Police, which was actually created by the UK before the White Helmets in 2012. The BBC in April 2017 were promoting this organisation. And so we're seeing the focus being on the Free Syrian Police and not on the White Helmets and on the local councils, but predominantly not on the White Helmets, who are, let's say, the flagship of this propaganda fleet. And you're quite right about the rebranding. We're seeing this shifting around of the brands and the names. The same as actually we see within the UK government. You know, the funding is coming from DFID, or it's coming from the CSSF, or it's coming from another interdepartmental body. So it's all to create confusion, and it's to muddy the waters and to remove transparency and clarity over what the UK government is actually doing to fund and finance terrorism in Syria.
And in fact, if you look closely, Vanessa, if you look closely at the mainstream press, here we've got the BBC. This is a headline from April: Free Syrian police go unarmed to help their community. Well, we find, if we look closely, that who's lurking in the background but the white helmets. And Patrick, you took this video while you were in Syria, which again is showing the fact that posters exist with white helmets and Free Syrian Police.
So that's UK taxpayer money right there. You're looking at marketing material for the Free Syrian Police with the white helmets and the local council, one of the Aleppo local councils there. And there's a lot of this promotional paraphernalia, Mike, which was all over the place. Of course, we did what the Guardian and the BBC didn't do, is we actually went and looked for this ourselves. So that's how we know this. And this is why our reporting is quite a lot deeper, Mike, than what you're seeing on the BBC, the Guardian, and the Times, who seem to have done a good job finding out about camcorders and mobile phones. But that's about it, Mike, and maybe some wage slips from Adam Smith International. So they're going to argue about, how much the contractors made in Turkey. But this is the real story, Mike.
Absolutely. We showed a still from this, I suppose, last week, but the white helmets, uniforms with all kinds of logos on them.
Sure, and I'm just going to remind everybody here, and I'm sure Vanessa will probably comment on this, but the white helmets themselves have amassed nearly 200 million, if or more, $200 million. Where has all that money gone, Mike? This is a good question. 200 million. That's a lot of. It's a lot of uniforms, Mike.
I've been asking the question, and the Foreign Office doesn't want to answer. The Department for International Development doesn't want to answer. And as Vanessa just said, in their latest response to me, the Department for International Development said, well, we couldn't answer that question. You'd have to go to the Foreign Office. And this is the key point. Who is funding? The funding streams are coming from what appear to the outside to be separate departments. And what it seems to be allowing them to do is to sort of point fingers at each other and say, well, we can't give you that information. You have to go to the Foreign Office. You ask the Foreign Office, and you have to go to the Department for International Development, or you have to go to the CSSF. It's all mixed up, and they're deliberate obfuscation of what's going on.
Can I make one suggestion right here, and then we'll go to Vanessa? I would ask right now on the UK column, I think we should have a public inquiry into foreign aid money in Syria. I think it's about time. And if this story doesn't trigger something like that, what will, Mike? That's what we're going to ask right now today. A public inquiry on UK foreign aid and how it's spent in Syria on these programs and others.
Something you've said to me recently, Vanessa, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the British government's concern about people's criticism of the white helmets isn't so much about their concern about the white helmets themselves, but it's their concern about the fact that they're rolling a template out in multiple places, and if we expose this template, they can't use it again. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the defense and the rabid protection of this organization is nothing to do with the white helmet operatives themselves per se. Yes, it's to do with the protection of the concept for future hybrid wars, multi-spectrum military interventions, definitely.
Now, of course, what kicked this off in the first place was your talk at the Geneva Press Club. So let's just put this one up on screen to end this section. Le Club Suisse de la Presse paired, well, you can say the rest, 100,000 francs. Sorry, it's a live program. Anyway, they've had their funding removed from the local government, is that correct?
Yeah, it's actually the Geneva Canton or the Geneva Parliament have withdrawn funding of 100,000 francs, which is equivalent to $100,000 pretty much, from the budget for the Geneva Press Club for next year. Now, while they have not openly said this is in relation to Guy Metton allowing or giving a platform to diverging views on the white helmets, again, it's a strange coincidence that it has happened after the attacks on him by Reporters Without Borders and the Swiss media. So this is a disgusting mafia tactic to censor the freedom of press, by an organisation, Reporters Without Borders, that purports to defend freedom of press, globally, which of course they clearly don't.
Well, we put this up yesterday that it's a done deal, Brian, over the divorce agreement over the European Union, but apparently it's not quite as done as we thought, because well, we were saying yesterday that the Northern Ireland border is going to be used as the excuse for a customs partnership. That still seems to be the case, although the DUP wasn't too happy with the way that this was coming about, apparently, allegedly. So they've put the kibosh on it. And of course, Theresa May, in such a weak position at the moment, absolutely relying on the DUP to prop up her pathetic administration, that she has to do what they say.
Well, blackmail.
Yeah, well, yes, in a sense, absolutely. So we'll come on in detail to that in a moment. But before we do that, we thought we should have a look at what the BBC was doing about Brexit.
We did, indeed. And here's BBC webpage from a little bit earlier this morning. So we've got May fights to save Brexit deal after DUP backlash. But what caught my attention was this little thing to the right of the main headline here. And what does it say? Well, it says bamboozled by Brexit. Let's have a look at it. As talks stall, we get back to basics with this recap of what's happened so far. So I was very intrigued. I was very intrigued with the style of the graphic on this, because to me, the figure on the right is the woman. The figure on the left is a man. She's being pulled towards the man. But we've got half the Union Jack, and then we've got the European flag, and then we've got a funny little heart graffiti. I'm always very interested by images because a lot of money is paid by the people who create them. And I thought this was slightly reminiscent of stuff going back to the Soviet era, where there's meaning in the image. But maybe that was just me, Mike.
Well, there's no knee touching going on, I noticed, but definitely the impression you're given is that the EU is being drawn towards the UK, isn't that seems to be what's going on there?
Yeah, I think some real thought went into that, but we could be wrong. But when I started to delve deeper into this, I came across a lady called Sofia Betiza. And she tweeted out this: removing ourselves from the outer world to film a hashtag Brexit video with at Adam Fleming. Well, this is fascinating. Removing ourselves from the real world to film a CBBC Brexit propaganda piece. Viewers and listeners will understand why we're putting that in pretty early, but on the camera, it indicates they've already done over 15 hours filming. That's the elapsed time on the side of the camera. So this was a lot of money went into this. Here's the happy couple. And now we've got a tweet from Adam Fleming. He said, I've made a video about hashtag Brexit with @Sofia Betiza, which accidentally looks like a rom-com. Now, I will admit to viewers that I had to ask you, Mike, what a rom-com was, and apparently it's a romantic comedy. So we've got a BBC Brexit documentary which has accidentally become a romantic comedy. I find this fascinating as to the background. Image, again, I find very interesting. We've got the man standing up solidly with the European Union flag, and then nestled against him in a silly little girl posture is the silly little girl waving the Union Jack. Don't know whether there's symbology in that, but it did just catch my eye. So as usual, the UK column did our homework. We went to have a look at the people, and here's the young lady. There's a lot about her. She did a master's in international journalism at City University. She lives between London and Brussels, and she worked at the European Parliament and at the European Commission. So this lady isn't really a citizen of UK. She's really a citizen of the European Union. She's worked in the European Union. I think she's Italian with a little bit of Croatian, I think, in her. She's an internationalist.
Yes.
An internationalist who's worked for the European Union. So my first question is she independent in making this report, or is she biased towards the European Union?
Well,
we don't know, do we?
No.
Well, what about the lover, so to speak. Here's Adam Fleming, and of course he became very big in BBC. So this is children's television.
The children's news.
Children's news in particular, news round. And as I've indicated there, was very big on the fact he'd been to America, Mike, and he'd been able to eat some really wonderful pizza in Chicago.
Good stuff.
So this is good stuff. This is teaching British children how to eat properly. It's giving them politics. This is all good. If you want to have a look a little bit more, you can have a look at Daily and Sunday Politics, because he started to move up in the world. And then we found this, which I found fascinating, because here he is tweeting out that he's been able to help decorate the EU Council's Christmas tree while waiting for foreign ministers to arrive. So he's the Brussels reporter. And I'm going to say I was very clever because I found this out myself, Mike.
Yes.
You'll understand that comment a little bit later. But as with all love affairs, there's often trouble. There is another woman. So let's meet the other woman in this love affair. It's this lady, Suzanne van Hoymissen, and she's based in Brussels, worked with the BBC, done work with the European Union. So I asked the same question, is this woman independent?
Is there any independence?
We don't know. So if our viewers and listeners are curious as to what we're talking about, we thought the only way to analyse this BBC video is to actually watch it. And then we'll make some comments.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi. In Brexit, there were two things happening at exactly the same time.
There are people in Europe making big decisions about their lives. I've been speaking to some of them.
And there are negotiations happening in Brussels, which I've been following the whole time.
So that we can help you make sense of all of this.
Brexit, Northern Ireland.
Brexit's going to be a wonderful thing.
Oh, excuse me.
Right, now, Trump. They've got Trump in at the very beginning. Brexit is going to be a wonderful thing. And then we've got Theresa May going, and yep. There's some clever psychology going on there.
This is an immensely clever piece of video work. This is really designed to play on people's minds. You've got the very flashy photography, but who is the man saying that Brexit is a good thing? Well, it's Trump, the man that the BBC just berates time after time after time. If Trump says everything, it's fake news, it's wrong, it's extremist, it's racist. So they use Trump to put the message across that Brexit is a good thing. And in fact, what that is doing is turning people off that message. And then we follow it up by the Prime Minister not giving a clear message, but focusing on the cough, as you say.
Right. So the first comment in the chat box is this aimed at 6-year-olds? I would say very well done. We're getting there, but it gets worse.
People also picking up on the fact that this is delivered in this most unbelievably condescending way. Who is the audience? Now, this is on the front page of the BBC's website. It's next to the headline article to do with Brexit and Theresa May. There is no indication that this is for children. And of course, the reason for that is it's not meant for children. This, as somebody else has already commented, is designed for a heavily dumbed down audience. But I think they are targeting younger people. So maybe we've got people, teenagers, late teens or into their early 20s who probably are used to some of the news round stuff. This is to drag their mind further into the gutter. But it's very, very cleverly put together.
Let's move on. Completely different subject now, Brian. This is a spectacular piece of news because Google has decided that it's going to put 10,000 staff onto tackling extremist content online. Now, extremist content, at the moment they're talking about violent videos, extremist terrorist videos and so on YouTube. They're saying that they will dedicate more than 10,000 staff to rooting out violent extremist content in 2018 on YouTube. They said that YouTube is going to make sure that any videos which mislead, manipulate, harass or even harm people are going to be removed. And they're going to provide their customers with curated content from now on. So the question then is that going to be limited to what's viewed as violent extremism, or is that going to creep into other areas? Perhaps
the danger is, Mike, that of course the definition of violent extremism has been coming out of the government or governments, because we say it's not just UK governments, we could say it's the US government as well, and the definition becomes ever broader. So we're now at the point that if you dare to come out with an opinion which doesn't agree with what the British government is doing, you're automatically being flagged up as a potential domestic extremist. Later you'll move into the potential domestic terrorist bracket. So where is an organisation like YouTube getting the policy from? Well, the policy is coming in through the, I'm going to say, the world political system. And this is immensely dangerous, because it will only get broader. There will be more and more definitions of what domestic extremism is.
Well, it is coming in from the world political establishment, but let's remember that it was David Cameron that took the point on this with his speech at the United Nations a few years ago. Theresa May has taken up the baton, and she is absolutely driving this forward. She was calling Google and the others, Facebook and Twitter, into number 10 Downing Street, and she, alongside Australia and a couple of other countries, but it's her mainly taking point on this. So it is being driven through Britain.
Yeah.
So where do we go, Melanie?
Well, where do we go is we'll come on to what Britain is like, and I'm going to once again put Melanie Shaw's face on screen, and I'm going to ask again, and I'm going to keep asking, that people do take the trouble to write to this lady. What is happening to this woman is utterly wicked. This is Theresa May's Conservative Britain in 2017. So Melanie Shaw in prison. She does not know the full details of what she's been convicted for. She has no release date, and she is being treated in the most appalling way. Why? Because of the knowledge she has of the British government's involvement in the abuse of children. So we think it is worth a little bit of your time to write a letter and or send a Christmas card, and you can freeze the screen and have a look at the address on screen yourself. End on this, which is a serious note, but the Telegraph reporting, excuse me, that the International Criminal Court is saying that it is going to target British servicemen and women. This is to do with Iraq. So although the government's Iraq inquiry was totally discredited, we had solicitors making up information that was pushed through, and a lot of money with payouts and fees changing hands. Many people thought the whole thing was going to die away, but now the ICC has picked it up and says, well, they could well be targeting British servicemen and women for alleged crimes out in Iraq. And I just wanted to put Tony Blair's picture on screen, because of course they're not going to go for the people who've created all this stuff in the first place. So although we've had a death in one of the international criminal courts recently, a suicide in fact, as a result of 13 years of pressure, men like Tony Blair, well, it doesn't really matter, does it, Mike?
No, apparently not.
It doesn't. Defence remains an immensely important subject in UK at the moment. As Veterans for Britain said recently, that of course if a nation state loses the ability to control its own military forces, it no longer exists as a nation state. And those words absolutely true. We'll be coming on to that in a moment. But first of all, we need to have a little bit of a refocus on the BBC. So yesterday we pointed out that the BBC had an article, Bamboozled by Brexit, highlighted here in the red circle. And this was an educational film to help members of the public who weren't, well, perhaps quite bright enough to understand Brexit themselves. So the BBC had come up with what appeared to us to be a very childish cartoon. But we are now bamboozled, because it appears that the Bamboozled by Brexit has disappeared. It wasn't easily visible on the BBC's website today. I found it by searching the whole of the website for it. I may have missed it, but it doesn't seem to be very high on the the viewing or the reading figures. So bamboozled by Brexit following a UK column analysis seems to have disappeared, Mike.
Well, it's interesting because their featured videos tend to stay up for a couple of days.
Yeah, but not this one. This one, which we described as a childish propaganda piece, has disappeared. If you haven't seen our news report from yesterday, then please do, because we did a lot of analysis of this really unpleasant piece of pro-EU propaganda by the BBC. But there is good news. So we say, relax. The BBC is to educate our children in truth. Couldn't get better, really, Mike, could it?
No, indeed. So the BBC is now going to be teaching fact from fiction in schools. They're going to send BBC journalists, including News at 10 journalist Hugh Edwards, into BBC schools. 1,000 of them are going to get the opportunity in the first effort to be told what fake news is. And
what the truth is. The BBC is going to be saying what the truth is.
Since they're going into schools, Brian, it's perhaps not surprising then that they have a special page on this on BBC's Newsround programme. Now, for anybody that hasn't grown up in the United Kingdom, BBC Newsround is the BBC's news programme for children, and it was always on during children's television programming in the afternoons as I was growing up, and of course it's on CBBC now. So they have at the top of the screen there, underneath the headline, there's a video, and I just wanted to have a little discussion about this video because you'll see what we're talking about as we go through here.
Fake news.
Fake news.
Fake news.
Fake news.
Fake news.
Fake news.
It's been one of the most talked about subjects of the year.
Fake news is a big problem. This is what is and isn't news.
Fake news. But what is it, and what does it mean to you?
Fake news is when someone spreads rumours that aren't true.
It's more of like a scam, I think.
I think fake news is rumours spread around by people to get attention.
Sometimes it's like so persuasive that you think that it is real.
If it's serious news, it can get you possibly worrying and thinking about stuff too much.
So already,
fake news.
That's the wrong graphic. The first thing they've done there is first of all reinforce it's all about fake news. But then we've had some discussion with some pupils about what fake news is, they may be thinking too much about what's going on in the world if they're presented with lots of fake news. It's already some kind of psychological attack on children, basically seems to be the message here. But remember, this is a report which is for children themselves.
A thing that comes out for me in that film clip, Mike, is that, of course, the interviews are only with children. Parents are not involved in this. Parents are not asked what they think about what the material their children may be able to access. Isn't it interesting, though, the little girl at the end actually says that if you get the real news, some of it can be quite scary. So even young children are astute enough to work out that actually when they're getting what they think is the real news, that can be pretty scary. But BBC video targeted at the minds of children, using them as propaganda, effectively.
So let's go.
Fake news usually comes down to two things. Firstly, false news stories that aren't true at all.
So false news stories that aren't true at all, Brian. And as we can see there, let's look at what they're saying are false news stories. We've got on the left amazing images of real UFO sighting. This is what's being described as fake news. If we look at the BBC website over the years, what have we got? Well, here's a headline: UFO sightings and other insights into 1960s Valley's life. Rendlesham Forest UFO sighting, new evidence claim. The day UFOs stopped play. Broadhaven UFO sightings marked 40 years on. So the BBC doesn't seem to be too worried about covering UFO subjects. Does that mean that that's fake news? Is that by their definition they've been peddling fake news?
Mike, the BBC doesn't have any definitions. It'll shift its definitions to
suit itself,
whatever the latest propaganda is.
Of course, it's not just the BBC, and probably the Daily Express is the worst for this. Alien bombshell, US Navy filmed UFO that defied physics. UFO spotted flying over Yellowstone volcano. Watch astonishing moment, UFO scatters clouds. UFO shock as alien flying saucers snapped hovering over Great Wall of China. Alien proof, object seen in the sky that's physically impossible for mankind to build. Secret space program, is this proof that US TR-3B UFO built with alien technology? And so it goes on. It is just impossible to get away from this stuff, but there's no criticism apparently within this of the mainstream media, because well, I'm actually
You're lost for words
as to what the point.
Because the hypocrisy of the BBC here is so breathtaking.
Absolutely.
So breathtaking.
Absolutely. So let's move on.
So do you think you'd be able to spot it? Well, these kids here are taking part in a project looking at how much kids like you know about fake news and how they deal with it. It's part of a project that's been running all year. The expert in charge of it thinks that from the age of 10, kids should be taught more about how to spot fake news.
Children know that fake news exists, but do they actually recognise it when they see it online, on the TV and in the newspapers? That's where lessons would really help. Because if children stop thinking and feeling that they can actually believe the news is true, then they might start switching off altogether and actually not show an interest in the world around them.
So that's an expert, Brian, but the expert is not named. There's no description of where the expert has come from. It's just an expert. So I contacted BBC News Round earlier to find out who this expert is. Here she is. And it's a lady called Beth Hewitt. And she is Director of Conversion at Media City UK. Now we'll come on to Media City UK in a second, but what else does she do? She's a Senior Lecturer in Media Practice at the University of Salford. She's worked across a range of postgraduate and undergraduate creative media programs. She has program-led the Master MA in Documentary Production and an MA in Wildlife Documentary Production. She went on to create and develop the MA in Children's Digital Media Production, which apparently is the only one in the UK. So a great academic, or is she? Because actually, as you read down her CV, you discover that while she is a Senior Lecturer in Media Practice at the University of Salford, her background is all within the BBC and ITV.
What a coincidence.
So she is a BBC person who happened to go off and get a master's degree and is now teaching children in how to identify fake news. But getting back to this business of being Director of Conversion at Media City UK. Media City UK is apparently a joint venture between Peel Land and Property Group and Legal and General Capital. And their vision for Media City UK is to become a leading international hub for the creative and digital sectors and a vibrant destination to work, live and play. Well, how do we look around for Media City UK as you do? And oh look, in fact, when you look a bit closer, you find that Media City UK absolutely supported by the Commonwealth and by CSC leaders in Common Purpose. And so the question then has to be asked, Brian, who is pushing this policy?
Well, we can have a look at some of the answers to that very easily. I was going to say this is just remarkable. Yesterday, I thought we'd covered some of the worst stuff that the BBC has ever done, but their video yesterday, Bamboozled by Brexit, was targeted at adult minds. But here are the BBC inside schools, not even declaring their own credentials, because they have one of their own people helping to create this news for the BBC to report. But policy, we better get to Demos. We've mentioned Common Purpose, and of course Common Purpose at one stage in close proximity as far as offices were concerned with Demos. And let's remember that Demos has consistently been interested in the minds of children. We reported this several years ago, Truth, Lies and the Internet. This was all about how Demos was working to see how young minds were being influenced by information they could freely access on the Internet. And Demos said, well, really, we need to be there to help control what children learn. Now let's remember that Demos was formed by former Marxism Today editor Martin Jacks and Jeff Mulgan. And of course, Jeff Mulgan, one of the key Common Purpose advisory people to Blair. So what are they really saying? Demos is the I'm going to say the Marxist organisation that should frame what's in your children's minds. So this is one of their reports, Truth, Lies and the Internet, a report into young people's digital fluency. This is one of their researchers, Jamie Bartlett, for the analysis of social media. And what's he saying? There's an equal measure of mistakes, half-truth, propaganda, misinformation and general nonsense. Knowing how to discriminate between them is both difficult and extremely important. We, Demos, are going to get into the schools and teach your children what they should know. This was one of his tweets that he's written a new report, working along Ipsos Mori. So you work with a company that is taking public opinion.
Yes.
And you're forming public opinion. That's an interesting little relationship there.
Absolutely.
We're bringing this one because, of course, we don't have to go far when we find that this policy actually comes straight out of the UN, UNESCO, rethinking education. This means moving beyond literacy and numeracy to focus on learning environments and on new approaches to learning for greater justice, social equality and global solidarity. Education must be about learning to live on a planet under pressure. It must be about cultural literacy on the basis of respect. On it goes. This is where the policy comes from. The BBC never, ever does any investigation into that type of material.
The Demos going into the schools clearly didn't have quite the effect, so now the BBC needs to take over and do it themselves. So I just end this little section off. I wonder what effect this is actually having, because remember what they were talking about, there was a program that they were showing on screen that has been running all year with this so-called expert. So let's have a look and see what the effect actually was at the end of the day.
I think fake news should be taught in school because then they can be more aware of what's around them and whether they know if it's fake or not and what to believe.
If you weren't taught about it, you would not know what's truth. The best advice that I've learned is like look out for proper brands.
So if you
wow,
right?
Well, I've got to say I hadn't heard that little bit before. Wow.
Right. So if you're not taught about it in school, you won't know what the truth is. Yeah. And the only people to trust are the proper brands.
So the BBC's in selling itself as the BBC, as the trustworthy purveyor of news. David, we're going to give you some comment in a minute. Let's just add a little bit more to this. I'm very interested to hear what you've got to say, because of course this is absolutely new to you, what we're talking about. So let's have a look at the BBC's track record. This is Radio 4, a lady called Nicola Stambridge. She was going to assist the UK column to investigate the abuse of children at Oxford and Cherwell Valley College. This was after this very brave Asian gentleman in the bottom right started to blow the whistle on the abuse of white children. Nicola Stambridge told me on the phone she was pulled off the case by her editor. But in any case, they'd spoken to the local authority who said, well, we haven't done anything wrong. So that was the end of the BBC's investigation. We've also had Jimmy Savile, BBC Scotland, refusing to investigate the Holly Gregg case. This one, I think people might remember, a lot of the child abuse charities got very upset at the paedophile statue outside the BBC itself. That statue was never removed because the BBC quite likes it there.
Yeah, well, they support Eric Gill, who was a paedophile himself, who created this monstrosity.
Yeah. And what else is the BBC up to? Well, they were faking wildlife shots. Here's the veteran cameraman claiming species smaller than rabbits are filmed on custom-built sets and then sold to children as real news. We got the BBC making a documentary more sensational by getting used to put up their hoodies so they looked more sinister. And this one, which I just find obscene, is the BBC's charity Media Action boasting that when they were working in Syria, they were working with the opposition in order to help foment trouble in the country and to overthrow Assad. So here is the BBC now boasting it's been working for a year inside schools to teach young children what the truth is. David, this is just outstanding stuff. The BBC has got to be one of the most dangerous media organisations in the world.
Quite. Yeah, thank you. Well, there's two things clearly need to happen. There needs to be some parents get involved here rapidly, nationally, and they need to be going into their head teachers and saying, we don't want the BBC anywhere near our kids under any circumstances. If they do approach the school, let us know. So that needs propagating rapido. Second thing is we need the licence fee stopping, and this organisation needs to be stopped and disbanded. You know, from my point of view, on the basis they will not, under any circumstances, speak about EU military unification, EU military union, what's happening in PESCO, what the ultimate sort of, you know, topography in Europe is with that, is more than enough to me to say, well, you know, this organisation is frankly morally moribund.
Absolutely.